The galaxy is filled with life and resources. The latter far more abundant than any had ever truly realized. While there were many worlds that could easily be exploited for their resources for cheap costs, and without much danger beyond the normal stuff like cave-ins and industrial accidents, there were some worlds where it was impossible to exploit the resources on them, mainly because the local wildlife simply wouldn't allow it. And yes, you heard that correctly, the wildlife. Not a sapient industrial species, but the wildlife. The galaxy has a classification system for the different types of worlds out there. Everyone has heard it be used since the moment they were born. Death worlds, garden worlds, hell worlds, that sort of thing. And it's the death worlds that we'll be focusing on today, as there are many, many of these such worlds out there, flush with countless resources, that would allow us all to construct great fleets or even megastructures, if only they weren't inhabited by the most hostile wildlife in the galaxy. Of course, some death worlds produce sapient civilizations, like humanity or the Krelp. But it is humanity that shall be the subject of this lecture, as they usually are, because humanity is, in their own words, batshit crazy. They are without a doubt 3 fries short of a Happy Meal, and the reason for this will become apparent in due time. You see, when humanity entered the galaxy, they met the rest of us, and at first they seemed fairly, again in their own words, chill compared to some of the other species out there. We learned of their skill at exacting violence and bloody retribution. Their kindness and generosity had been the subject of many stories, both fictional and otherwise. Even their entertainment has managed to capture our hearts and minds in myriad ways, but we never really got to see just how insane they were. Because they took one look at those resource-rich death worlds and asked a simple question. Why hasn't anyone claimed those yet? Of course, the answer was fairly simple. Too much effort, too costly, too dangerous. The amount of lives we would have to throw at each of those worlds, and the costly equipment, as well, was simply too cost-prohibitive to even contemplate it for longer than a few seconds, and so we left those planets alone. But the humans, oh, those humans. One company, a startup as they would call it, decided our reasoning simply wasn't good enough, and they deployed to a world called Navius. We are being charitable with that term, for in reality they actually crashed on it, and they'd only sent 3 people to do all the work. Curiosity got the better of us, and we assembled a group to watch the efforts of these 3 brave, but foolish humans. Surely they wouldn't last too long in this world. They had minimal resources, no backup of any kind, and no hope. However, as our small fleet of science vessels streaked towards the planet, we began to pick up strange, near incomprehensible transmissions from the surface of the planet on our long-range sensors. It surely wasn't the local wildlife creating such signals. No, it had to be the humans, which was impossible. They'd only been there for a few days. They should, by all rights, be dead by now. While we certainly didn't want them to die, it was all but guaranteed. When at last we reached the planet, we discovered there were satellites in orbit, and that much of the area where these 3 humans had crashed was now heavily industrialized. More surprising was that they were managing to hold off the wildlife with an incredible amount of automated weaponry which was refueled, rearmed, and repaired by a logistics system that practically ran itself. Sprawling lines of conveyor belts transported everything from raw resources to nuclear munitions to ship pieces and satellite components. We hovered in orbit, watching as the humans prepared for another expansion to their factory, and the wildlife had evolved rapidly to attempt to combat the invaders, but it was no use. Rolling artillery barrages, rapid strikes by unmanned vehicles, and rather literally using a terraforming tool to take the ground out from under the beasts and their hives, replacing it with water in which they could not escape. The ship's communications officer tapped into their comms and heard the whispered giggles of an insane human. "Fuck you. Water fills your house," was repeated over and over again. When a human happened to die, we saw they just exit a chamber, fresh-faced and headed off to where they had died. We discovered that each replacement human was an exact clone of the previous human, and that made far more sense to us. We watched as they attempted to shield themselves from the nearby star's coronal mass ejections, but in the end it was pointless, for the ejections never got even close to their great sprawling factory. And when the next artillery barrage began to clear out another nest, while the humans began to build the next part of their operation, we heard something else. Rhythmic, thumping music was the backdrop for something else, as the sign appeared over the artillery pieces. We read the words upon it, and felt a shiver run down our spines, or spine equivalents. After that, we decided we should probably just leave the humans on the planet alone, for they were clearly insane, and so after documenting just a bit more, we turned ourselves around and went home. When we returned, we checked the stock markets and found the human company quickly rising to the very top. It is a prestigious position these days, one that has been dominated by this particular human company, which has since expanded to countless other death worlds to exploit their resources as well. We learned of humanity's insanity through a company with the strangest of names, Bean Boys Incorporated. Since then, humanity has had a near monopoly on death world resource harvesting. Not that we complain about it. To them, it's just another crazy challenge to overcome, and they do it masterfully.